Welcome to the show, Katy Jon Went.
Thank you so much.
So, Katy, you have spent your life having difficult conversations. So, I'm going to come straight in with a pretty tough question. What is the first difficult conversation you can remember having?
Well, it's got to be with family, one would have to say, 'cause that's when where your early years are, right? And then on reflection, I'm trying to think what should it have been, what could it have been. I was one of those well-behaved children. I had to compensate for my sister, who I get on with brilliantly, but she admits, and my mum admits, she was more difficult to handle, the teenage girl, and
Yeah.
the well-behaved at the time boy. And so I think actually probably one of the weirdest thing was actually my kind of coming out story is much later in life, and actually I was outed by my ex-wife, who then rang my parents and told them I was coming out, sort of thing,
Right.
in anger. So that I didn't even get control of that story. So that wasn't my difficult conversation. I guess the difficult conversation was when my mum rang me back and said, "What's this I hear?" And both that was a difficult conversation, but in hindsight, the weird thing was probably when I was at university, and I actually rang them and actually said, "I don't want to be called Jonathan anymore." And they go, "Oh, I want to be called John." And it was as hard to have them react to me wanting to just shorten my name from Jonathan to John, let alone 20 years after that, say, actually, I don't want to be called John anymore. Now it's Katie or Katy Jon or KJ or whatever else. My mum is still playing with all of the names at 90. But
Wow.
it's the things we think are hard sometimes aren't hard, and the things that we think will be easy turn out to be hard. It's because they bring their baggage. It's not baggage, it's history. People bring their history and their meaning into every conversation. I didn't expect to get a response to both of those conversations about a name change. It was never anything really difficult because I didn't really kind of do the sex, drugs, and rock and roll as a teenager. I waited till later. So I didn't really have those difficult conversations to say, "Mum, I brought someone home. I've got someone pregnant." That would never have happened anyway. I was infertile, but that's another story. But no, it's the whole kind of the loaded reveal, and then my mum saying, "Actually, we don't want two Johns in the family. Your father's John. We called you Jonathan for a reason."
I was going to ask about the resistance to the Jonathan.
We've already got a John in the family, invested in this. And then when I come out later as trying to say I want to go by Katie now, and they go, "Catherine was your other birth name, which you had for the first 2 hours at birth before they worked out your actual sex and all the rest of it." That doesn't feel right either. So they've had to adjust to all of my name combinations, and my sister called me just KJ for a long time. And I still get called every name under the sun by them, but they're all nice ones. They're not bad names like
Yeah. As long as it's kept respectful.
it sometimes really is the simple things that are difficult and vice versa. But it's because we have loaded interpretations of everything that we bring to a conversation. And it's just like anything. It's just like, yeah, it's like flirting with someone. It's like starting a conversation. It's the first words are always harder than they really are. But once you get going, you humanize everything and you relax into it. And the whole point of a conversation is it turns into a dialogue, not a confrontation. But we fear difficult conversations because we are loaded with thinking it's going to be a confrontation. And it doesn't
Yes.
have to be. It can be a human experience.
And it's interesting that you make that distinction about confrontation and conversation, because when you speak to somebody about, well, why didn't you just say at the time? Particularly, I think of the workplace where somebody's like, and maybe an employee's bad behavior go on, well, I don't like confrontation. And the assumption is it's going to be a confrontation and not necessarily a conversation. I wonder how we've got to that point that already we assume it's going to be combative.
Because we're human. We're fearful, we're insecure, and it is confronting to have the conversation, but it need not be confrontational. What we bring into it, we fear the worst. We live, I live with chronic anxiety anyway, so you're basically living in your worst nightmare already in your head. And in fact, the reality, the worst it can be is as bad as you've already imagined it. And the best it can be is nothing like how you imagined it. So the net result is actually just have the conversation, because that, or at least get it out of your head and happen. But we avoid it, whether it's in a relationship. You know, you spend years and months and weeks avoiding difficult conversations in the workplace, with family, with your partner, whatever else. We struggle to ask or say what we want and what we don't want, what we like and what we don't like. And yet actually it may be hard, but it always does make things easier, or at least more transparent, or at least you realize, hey, this isn't working. These are the next steps. But you can't take the next steps unless you start with a conversation. And I've got a piece of art that I was given by the artist, which I think is wonderful. And it's a Second World War microphone that, instead of coming out of it, the cable like you would have for a microphone, the cable coming out of it is actually barbed wire. And it's a symbol of, the Second World War. But the title of the art piece is called War. It
All
begins
right.
and ends with words. And this confrontation versus conversation, every conflict started with wars of words and then turned into wars of bombs. But the only way you ever stop them, is eventually by getting back to the table. Even if it's having conquered someone or whatever else, or surrendered, you then negotiate. You have to negotiate a peace. But it's the escalation of words that causes wars, and it's the de-escalation of them that eventually causes peace. So word conversations are everything. But whether that's, as I say, a relationship or the workplace or social media, politics and everything else, how we use our words is everything. And I do think it's like, but the fear is always going to be there. But it's there's that great book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, by Susan Jeffers. Sorry, Susan Jeffers, I never read it. I bought the book. I read the front cover, and like we were chatting earlier about always reading books completely. I read the front cover. I said, this is great. This is absolutely true. Do it anyway. So yes, I'm afraid going into conversations sometimes. Yes, I'm afraid of who I might engage with, what they might say, how they might, misrepresent me. But at the end, we can't actually control anything. All you can do is actually just live in the moment of that conversation and eventually relax yourself and enjoy it.
And enjoy it, which is an important part. And you have been in the trenches over the years, Katy. That's how you came to my attention. And what is interesting about you is, despite your anxiety that you do have, you do get stuck into conversations, particularly with people will disagree with you. And we live in a time when people are very quick to start throwing the words hate speech around and free speech. How do you start a conversation with somebody where you might feel like they are hate speeching and but you believe in free speech, so do want to get into dialogue? What advice would you give to start that conversation?
I absolutely do believe in free speech. I think it's something that we have to defend, even if we don't always like who or what we are defending as part of it. If you want the free speech to express your thoughts, you have to defend someone else's right to express their thoughts. I don't think we should ever get into a thought control society, Minority Report, that old film, nor kind of 1984 type thing. So I obviously would prefer to choose fair speech alongside free speech. I don't want hate speech, but I don't want hate speech to be defined. I don't want to be hated, but I can't control that. You're free to hate me. That's not a problem. And I can't control your language. So if you use language that I'm not comfortable with, I can't control that. So I'm not into kind of language control, but I can choose to block my ears, go la 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 la, or I can just switch off or go away. So we have those freedom of choices to step away from it. Obviously, there are words that have gone out of use that we would be horrified if they came back into use, and particularly some of the language around racism, etc. But there's plenty of other language that everyone has gone, in my opinion, too far on defining as hate speech. And it now becomes this place of, you can't say this. To me, that is, cultish. Anytime someone, attempts to control or police your language, it becomes cultish, whether that's coming from the state, whether it's coming from different groups in society. And we become either oversensitive or over-controlling around language to the point we could say one religious group could say would be acceptable if that group said it, but if another group said it, it isn't acceptable. Why is that? Because we're more scared of offending one group over another, say around religion or politics or ideologies. So I will always defend free speech, but I guess the way I go into it, there's two things. One, if you only have conversations with people that agree with you, it'd be deadly boring. I miss, old school kind of, raucous pub arguments.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, yeah.
And you have to have some commonality, otherwise you wouldn't even engage. But if you all agreed completely, I'm checking out of this conversation. I'm bored, But I think what you have to have a few points of commonality, but the basic ones are humanity, decency, and respect, which will all be differently interpreted by degree again. And I always make it a matter of viewpoint for myself anyway to choose not to take offense. Whether someone is choosing to give offense, whether it's accidental slip-ups of language or whether it's deliberate slip-ups of language, it's a preference, and I can't control that. But I can choose whether to stay in the conversation or leave it. And I stay in the conversation if I feel that there's genuine interest in engagement in listening to my opinion. But my opinion shouldn't be listened to unless I'm willing to listen to yours. And so therefore, I've got to go into it with a curiosity and an interest in where you're coming from. And this isn't just about the gender wars conversations. This isn't just about left-right politics. I mean, I've always been interested in debate and discussion back in my 20s around religions. I was very strong in those days a Christian activist, pro-Jewish, pro-Israel, and I engaged a lot with Islam and with various sects and cults just because I was fascinated by the theological debate, as it were.
Yeah.
I go back 8 or 9 years and think about, the whole Brexit debate, which wasn't explicitly a left-right thing. It was cutting across new things. Or it could be the climate wars debate. But I remember always being more interested in how people arrived at their current thoughts rather than necessarily the current thoughts they had, because I had changed my mind over time. That my views, I'm now agnostic, whereas previously I was quite a fundamentalist in my faith position. My political positions, I voted across the entire political spectrum. I'm probably moving again. Way back before you still get the same thing.
Yeah.
But so I know that my opinions on various things, my opinions of war, my opinions on feminism, my beliefs, around trans stuff, whatever it might be, they keep changing because I keep engaging. So I engage with people they don't have to be open-minded, but they have to be at least interested in maybe my viewpoint isn't 100% right, and I'm willing to receive more information that might modify my viewpoint. But if you do go in with that fundamentalist attitude, I'm explicitly 100% right, whatever you say is going to be wrong. And that happens on both sides of all of the fences in society. I'm interested in nuance and discovering the human being. So when someone tells me, I say it like this, if someone tells me they're what, my next question is why, when, and where did that come from?
Yeah.
Saying, well, that's your what, and here's my what, and let's our what battle it out. So the follow-up question to someone's statement shouldn't be you then with a counter statement. It should be a further exploration of the statement you've just heard from someone else. And that's showing interest in them. That's earning the right to be heard yourself by being willing to kind of hear them, if that makes sense. Which sounds kind of funny from me, given that I talk a lot.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, Katie, because when you've had your mind changed, is that your own research, or is that a combination of research and then speaking to people? How is it you found, it's quite big to shift your religion. And then obviously with the gender ideology positions from all sides, you've sat on lots of different sides, as we all have. And what is the one thing that will help you open your mind, or is it just one of those things?
As I said, I used to be quite a Christian fundamentalist. I used to be what's called a creationist, believing the earth was only created like 5,000 years ago. So very much,
Right.
Everybody was on Noah's Ark. The dinosaurs all got on happily and they were vegetarian, whatever. And I remember buying and reading books on evolution so that I could dismiss them. And then
Right.
and I remember studying Hebrew so that I could prove the Bible, and it ended up disproving bits of it to me in that sense, realizing it's poetic and not literal and things like this. So because I was willing to read, as you can see, there's a lot of that here. I'm just trying to look randomly around. I tend to buy the books I disagree with most.
Yeah.
And the books I want to learn from the most. I don't buy things or read things that reinforce my opinion. So I'm actually looking for fresh challenges. I'm looking to be open-minded. I mean, yeah, that bookshelf in the corner is all gender feminism books, and there's a pile just there, which is all the gender critical books. And
Yeah.
I do read them, and there's a massive ton of transgender autobiographies, but I stopped reading many of them a long time ago, simply because I would read 2 or 3 chapters and go, this is me, this is me, this is me. Oh, this isn't me. And I
Mm.
would realize that everybody's got their own personal individual lives. No book represents you. So there's no point looking to represent yourself or find yourself in that sense. You have to find yourself within. But so instead, then I looked for books that were different to me rather than books that were the same as me to continue to broaden myself. And I guess it goes back to, ancient Jewish and Greek philosophy is that you surround yourself with knowledge to remind you of how much you don't know.
Yeah.
And the more you read, the less certain you should become of things. Because the more you read, the more you realize, well, I haven't read every book yet. So there's probably stuff out there I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Umberto Eco called it his kind of anti-library. He had like 24,000 books and something. And he said, of course, you'd never read them. And there's the Japanese concept. I can't remember the name of it, but it is, again, surrounding yourself by piles of books that you may yet read.
Mm.
And to me, that keeps me aware that I cannot know everything. And therefore, I can't jump into any conversation with a self-righteous attitude of I'm right, you're wrong. And also, that is not the basis for the beginning of any conversation anyway.
Yeah. And actually, I was brought up a Christian Protestant, went to a school, and then I became an atheist. And then I realized the definition of atheist is that there is nothing. So I became agnostic because I thought, you can't possibly think that you know the answer.
Agnosis, in that sense, is being agnostic to me is a humble position. It's saying, I cannot 100% tell you there is no God, even though I personally don't believe there is one.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm open to new knowledge that may yet be discovered. How can we, for example, be an atheist or a theist on, extraterrestrial life? We haven't visited all the planets in the universe yet. Barely visited 2. Well, we know there is no extraterrestrial life, so we can only be agnostic towards it because we have to allow for more knowledge to come. And the things that we think now as normal, as science, as knowledge, 500 years ago were considered magic, simply because they were things we didn't understand yet. I still don't understand electricity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like magic for sure it is. And I even do it myself sometimes though, Katie, when I feel strongly about a certain thing or position that I feel like I know a lot about. And I hesitate sometimes, and I'm being really honest here, to debate something or learn more about it because I don't want my position to be changed, because I know that I will be changed on it if I hear more sides to it. And I think as well, as I've got older, 2 things can be correct at the same time because of nuance. Because what I see at the moment is everybody's so keen to go into their silo that they're not prepared to float around ideas and say, well, actually, I agree with that, but I don't agree with that. There's lots of examples of that at the moment. Do you think that social media is polarizing us, or do you think the media is polarizing us?
I think you've said it at a human basis first. Social media just amplifies the human element, which is we retreat into our teams, our tribes, our safe positions, the tribalism that means that whether it's football, cricket, rugby, sport, Eurovision, whatever it might be, that we're never going to admit the other side is better than us, even if on that day they were. In that sense, we're not, it's like the tribalism even expressed around Eurovision, even if such a song was amazing, but it was sung by that country, so it can't be good.
Yeah.
We don't want to move from that. Our us-them tribalism is one of the things that gives us a false sense of, but it does give us a felt sense of security by being surrounded by other like-minded people. And and our brains don't want to be challenged. It feels like an attack on our person to have to change our thoughts, but change is inevitable. And I guess I have changed myself to actually enjoy being wrong now. That sounds slightly odd, but I'll explain that. But what I mean is to embrace change, to embrace nuance, to embrace a change of position. Whether it was, say, trans in sport, and I'd rated Martina Navratilova on Twitter and Sharon Stone on GB News or whatever it was. Sorry, Sharon Stone would be fun as well.
Oh yeah, Sharon Stone.
But the point is, I realised, you know what, I was wrong on that. I don't mean they're necessarily 100% right always, but I'm moving my position closer to them. And then you soon discover that your tribe will no longer accept you because you have broken rank. You have been a traitor. You have stopped holding the party line. But that thing that you said about two things possibly being true, or at least we haven't found out which one of the two is, or can both be true, was something that F. Scott Fitzgerald said. And he said the sign of a great intelligence is basically the ability to hold these two things potentially as true at the same time and still be able to function. We may at some point find out that one is more true than the other, or one isn't true at all. But for a while, sometimes it's okay to hold things loosely. And my friend and former neighbour Linda Bellos used to say, just hold it loosely. And I think when we hold things tight, then they become precious. And anyone who kind of engages with that, we feel like this sort of precious thing, our belief, is being attacked. And our response to attack is very human, is to defend. But if you, as I say, embrace the unknown, embrace the agnosticism, embrace the nuance, embrace the human messiness of everything from conversation, etc. So that means I kind of, when I teach people this sometimes in the workplace, I said, go to work every day, and actually recognize that at some point you're going to be wrong. And get better at your reactions to being wrong, get better at your reactions to think, I wasn't right there, or this particular interaction didn't land as well as I thought. And it's quite possible for this, apart from that thing about two things being true at the same time, it's quite possible for one action to be absolutely right for one person and absolutely wrong for the next person. So you can do the same action or say the same thing, and two people receive it completely differently. It could be as simple as holding a door open for a disabled person using a wheelchair. And you go and do that on a Monday morning, and the person says, you think I couldn't open a door?
Yeah.
I didn't need your help. How patronizing of you. How ableist. And say, I'm never going to help a disabled person ever again because I got slapped for getting that wrong. So day two, you go to the office and there's a different person using a wheelchair, or the same person on a different day got out of bed differently.
Yeah.
And they're sat there waiting by the door and they're looking at you and you're going, go ahead. And they go, why aren't you going to open the door for me? Like, well, I did yesterday and you bit my head off, or someone else bit my head off, and that's why I no longer endorse a disabled group. Well, because I don't want to get it wrong. There isn't a right and a wrong sometimes like that. There's a conversation to be had. Would you like help? And sometimes you're still going to get your head bitten off and say, what do you think I need help? There are people, for whatever reason, it's not always going to land right. So sometimes you have to get used to life being messy, people being messy, but also get beyond that in that respect. So I think it's engaging with the messiness of humanity and recognizing also that I think age is great, except for the bit where your body starts to break. Age is great because it does bring an element of wisdom. We often have this idea that old people are more fixed in their ways. Lots of sitcoms and comedies and TV shows are about rigid beliefs, but it's actually the opposite in many respects. The most rigid beliefs are young people.
Yeah.
Yes, it's kind of open-minded rigidity. They're very inclusive, but I would also regard them as the least tolerant and the least patient in some respects. That they want to build a better world, but they want to build it yesterday, and you're wrong for not getting it right today. In that sense. But older people do mellow, and it was evidenced in US elections, British elections, that actually older people's views, they may be more conservative in the one hand, but they're also more moderate. And a lot more of the kind of more extreme polarized views come from young people. And yes, that is fueled by social media, but social media, yes, there's algorithms and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, social media is like alcohol. It'll bring out the worst of you or the best of you, but it will take away your inhibitions. And if you're a lovely person under alcohol, you're just a funny, lovely person.
Yeah.
Lovely person under alcohol, even your attempts to be nice fail, and you become an idiot. So I think it removes inhibition. There's a distancing aspect to social media. It's most important. It's the fact that everyone's nameless, faceless, distant, and you can say things with impunity because you know, unless it's certain police forces visiting your door for what you said on Twitter.
I was said that's changed a bit recently.
At the same time, you can say things that you might not otherwise say to someone's face. So,
Yeah.
and then we may regret those things anyway, which is also part of the problem. There needs to be accountability for what we let rip when we're. I mean, it's like that thing with, you shouldn't be in charge of your car with alcohol. We should have a breathalyzer before you can turn your car on. For some people, you can get those things now.
Yeah.
Maybe things like social media has to have a built-in breathalyzer before you can actually send tweet. And I think that is true. I think social media exaggerates the worst of us. It could exaggerate the best of us too if we choose to. But that distancing means we are more likely to say things where if that person was standing in the room with us, we wouldn't do it, which is also one of the reasons why I engage with people who disagree with me, because then I find the humanity in them. I hope they might see the humanity in me. I sat on panels with them, had drinks with them, etc., and realized you're just another human being. And I notice and I know the difference because I've been on air with people who on air were quite combative in conversation, perhaps, and we've been set up as a combative to polarized opinions on air. But speaking with them in the green room beforehand or coming off air and having a hug or say, let's get a drink next time and carry on this conversation. That has happened to me so many times that it has changed my mind about the humans, sometimes about their beliefs, but mainly about the humans and about the TV stations, the radio stations, the papers in which they write. I read across the political spectrum every day, and I watch across the political spectrum, and I have stopped judging what political position is allegedly of that TV station, of that newspaper, etc., because it's a human being, and I want to invest in the dialogue and the conversation with them.
Absolutely. And actually, something you said then about when you are engaging with people who you will disagree with. And I would say, Katy, looking at us two on paper, to use that vernacular, we will probably be quite opposed on our maybe. I mean, I'm assuming that it's maybe some political stuff. I mean, even the gender stuff we probably mostly agree on, I would think. But there are things, positions where we know with our friends, for example, if you look at something like the Israel-Palestine war at the moment is a hot potato. Trump is another one. Brexit, you mentioned. Again, there seems to be a split coming down the line with friendships. What advice would you give to somebody? Say if somebody is posting propaganda or whatever on a particular side and you know it is, but you really do want to open a conversation with them, not to prove that you're right, but just to maybe check their thinking. I know that might sound arrogant. Just to get the dialogue going so you can become friends again if you've kept a distance from them. How could you start that?
Well, I think there's two things. One is not the day after the Brexit vote or the day after, Hamas killed so many Jews, or the day after Israel then kind of effectively invaded Gaza, or whatever it might be, is to post on your social media, please defriend yourself now. Your different opinion to me. That was happening 10 years ago with Brexit. The number of people that, I mean, if you voted leave or whatever, remain, unfriend yourself. Unfriend them yourself. You want them to unfriend them themselves. And I live in a lovely little group of 3 or 4 cottages. We live in the middle of the woods, and as I mentioned before, Linda Bellos was one of my neighbours. On some political things, we actually agreed. We were both on the left. I used to be on the right. I'm probably now in the middle now, or nowhere. But we had some disagreements on the gender stuff, but we agreed on a lot of other LGBT equality stuff. And we would regularly have Sunday lunch and great debates and love it. And I think actually thinking now of my neighbours, everybody has a different politics, and yet we all sit down and drink together and talk together. So friendship doesn't have to be split because you voted a particular way. And, my family are all conservatives, to my knowledge, from the last time they voted, but I would probably want to clarify that if I was trying to defend them to some of my left-wing friends, but they're soft conservatives, or they all voted Remain, but they are conservative, or I think secretly Lib Dems, or whatever it might be. The whole point being their family, but also I know people across the whole political spectrum that would run into a burning building to save my life, and I would limp into a building and save theirs. The point is you can have friendships that go across those political barriers, and one politics does not mean an entire thing. And I remember doing one of those I love those political compass things that you can do,
Yeah.
particularly for an election. There was one that used to go around, and maybe it still does, called like Policies Not Parties. They find
Yes.
parties for it, and they just give you a bunch of questions, like a question, and then the answers of 4 parties, and you select A, B, C, or D, whichever one you think is closest to you. When you
Yeah.
get full results, so I got a surprise when I'd recently switched to voting Labour, and I did that thing, and it must have been 2017 or something like that, around that sort of time.
Yeah.
And my results on it were 85% Green, 15% UKIP. Crying, and he said, "But I'm just voting Labour. How did I answer this question?" It turns out that I'm more kind of environmental eco than I would vote. I still have a kind of strong sense of independent sovereignty, and at the same time, I still I voted Remain, and I would remain again tomorrow. But I also resent federalism and big government. So, and I remember engaging with Leave voters, and one of them was saying to me in a big rally either side of a road, big conflict sort of thing, and he was saying, "Will you guys stop calling us all Nazis and racists?" He said, "I've got an Indian wife. I'm not a racist. I just disagree with federal large government from Europe and some of the EU laws. And if you actually find out why people vote, it's for all kinds of different reasons."
Yeah.
And so don't think, so and this is what the problem is, nuance is dead. So I can be pro-Jewish, pro-Israel, anti-Netanyahu, anti-extreme Zionism. I can be pro-Palestine, pro-two-state solution, pro-Gaza, anti some people's interpretation of genocide. I can be explicitly anti-Hamas, anti-kidnapping, anti-killing people at a festival. Why can't we have the nuance of saying what you're pro and anti in that whole thing, rather than just say, "I've taken a side"?
Yeah.
Sides are messy. I take the human side,
Yeah.
and I take the solution side. In the sense, anyone who's part of the solution, not part of the problem. Are you trying to create a better world, a more peaceful world, a more prosperous world? If you're trying to do that, even if I disagree with how you're doing it, we have a point of commonality already.
Yeah.
So I think that's how you can start. Hey, do we both believe in free speech? Do we both believe in human rights? Do we both believe in people's, right to a roof over their heads, that it's not going to get bombed? Do we believe in people's right to private and family life without other people telling them what to do? Do we believe in people's right to do what they want with their own body, so long as they're an adult and a sound mind, etc.? Who interprets sound mind is the problem, but
Well,
but what are the things we can agree on? And Linda and I used to sit down and discuss this and say, hey, if we came at the whole sex and gender debate differently, instead of it being based on sex rights or gender rights, we came at it based on human rights, what would we agree on? And we thought, oh, this looks differently now. And trans rights are human rights, women's rights are human rights. And then we started thinking, well, bodily autonomy is a right. Freedom of expression is a right. Well, hold on, we both agree. And you can actually then bring in the religions and find that they can agree on those human rights as well. And yet you haven't yet had to have a religious conflict, let alone an ideological one. So I think finding points of agreement rather than immediately jumping to the points of disagreement, find what is your common ground. Like you are still family, like you still like the same football team, or you still like dinner. But everyone seems to want to fall out and put themselves in these ever decreasing silos. And and this is my experience, 50 plus years of joining groups and communities and looking for a utopian society. Every time you join it, someone tries to police it, and then you find you said the wrong thing and you're now out. So the society gets smaller and smaller and smaller, divides and divides and divides. So there's no point looking for the common valued, in that sense, society or common agreed belief. We have to find ways to get on with our disagreements, not try and make everyone agree with us, because that's never going to happen.
No, it won't. Interestingly, I've noticed past few years, maybe I've been more aware of it, particularly recently, where a lot of people have assumed that I have had one particular view on something and they've thought that everybody has. And it has been the last thing. Now, I have a relative I'm good friends with who doesn't live here. And we were chatting about something recently about the Palestine Israel thing, and we disagreed on that. She was absolutely shocked to find that I didn't take her position, and but because we both have a lot of respect, I just said, I'm really surprised that you're supporting what's that? That doesn't seem to be in line with your values. And she went, oh, right. And she sort of reflected on it because I said, actually, I do disagree with you there. Didn't get into it with her. I just said, actually, I disagree with you. And that opened a bit of a door. So I don't know whether I've changed her mind and I wasn't doing it to do that. I just felt it was really important that she knew that I didn't just blindly agree with that particular narrative. And
I
that
think
was interesting.
the phrase you just used, whether I didn't know whether I changed her mind or not. I think if we enter into everything with the purpose of changing someone's mind, I think that's a false goal. It's inevitably it's what we do, and it's what we do around. And the irony of politics slagging off each side and yet realizing that the only way you're going to be in power is if actually you do persuade some of the other side to vote for you instead. And you spent the whole of the last political campaign slagging them off, and now you want them to vote for you instead of vote for their side, so to speak. It's not going to go down too well, is it? So I don't enter into things to change people's minds, to change perspectives.
Yes, yeah.
Have them recognize there's more than one possibility here. And so I guess the phrase I always look for now is I want people to leave a conversation more open-minded.
Yeah.
More nuanced, both having heard and having felt heard, rather than change. I think change is inevitable, but you have to come to it on your own terms. If you come to it entirely through someone else's force of persuasion, you're either succumbing to a charismatic, cultish figure, or you're just changing your mind, ready to change it again in the future because you're like that thing that blows in the wind. I think you have to come to your own choices, and you have to be aligned with your own integrity, your own values, your own justices around that. But I mean, it's one of the things I like about the work I do with the Human Library is I get to engage with people of all persuasions, all religions, all politics. Same with what I do on TV and newspapers, etc. We all have to share this planet, and in our local communities we have to get on. So I looked up, how do we coexist? How do we cohere with each other? How do we build communities of difference, not communities of sameness? And that means we need some old school British kind of behavioral respect. Don't have to agree with you, but let's go back to, benignly tolerating each other.
Well, actually, Katie, I was going to ask you about this. This is one of my questions. Do you remember days when you would say, don't talk about sex, politics, religion? And that was you didn't know how anybody voted. I remember asking my parents when I was about to become old enough to vote, and they said to me, we're not going to tell you how we vote because you need to make your own decision. But I did find out how my parents vote because you get to know parties and things like that. And what would we be happy if we went back to that sort of British buttoned up, you don't talk about your politics, you just find other common ground?
I like the fact that we talk about it, but I think we have to talk about it with, again, a bit more of that British behavior. I don't like the idea that there's no, sex, politics, or death, or taxes, or whatever, or how much you earn. Discuss. Those are all the no-go areas at the dinner table. I do think that if you embrace those areas, it's going to make for a spicy conversation, and I like a spicy dialogue and a spicy dinner. But I think we have to recognize that they are sensitive areas to different people. I do think wading into them, it's got to be about consent to some extent. Some people like me don't really have a filter. So you ask me, there's so many times been on interviews with podcasts, I've regretted my answer. Dishonest. It's just that I was probably stupid enough to answer it, or at least foolish enough to answer it, or honest enough to answer it, because I So if somebody asks me about sex, death, politics, and all the rest of it, my musical taste, my political taste, my football taste, who I voted for, I will tell them
Mm.
because I don't really have a filter because I'm curious.
Mhm.
But if they're curious to ask, I will always answer. And my opinion might be different to the one I gave last week anyway. And I might think in hindsight, eek, I shouldn't have said that. That was too honest.
And you have had some considerable backlashes. You really have been in the trenches. How have you dealt with that? I've noticed that you say you come off X occasionally to cool
So
off.
I take breaks, but
Yeah,
not.
just take short breaks. How do you deal with that when you think I'm going to get cancelled again, or whatever that culture is? How do you square up to it that it's going to happen?
I deal with it humanly. First off, I take it personally. First, thank God, I should leave everything right now. I should close my big mouth. I should
Yeah,
cease to be. I don't call myself as an activist for any rights other than human rights. I call myself
yeah,
an activist for dialogue and conversation and a better world in that sense. But of course I take it humanly. I'm a human being. I don't have a thick skin, but it doesn't stop me from engaging because I will bounce back after a 4-day break, after I've had an onslaught that has seen
onslaught.
negative comments or 1.5 million shares of an interaction or whatever else. I think, oh God.
Yeah.
So no, I don't love that limelight, but I do love conversation. I do love engagement. I do love learning and indeed disagreeing with others. How do I cope? I do. I log off for 2 days. I go and sit in my garden by my pond, and I turn to drink. A nice cocktail, a nice whiskey cocktail in by the pond, and I go and get another cat. I mean, I've got a dozen at the moment. I think, but all the cats don't judge me.
That's why I love dogs.
Dogs or cats, no, yeah, same thing. I go and I ring up a friend. Can I borrow your dog? Can we go for a dog walk around the lake? So I think I balance it by stepping away from the trenches in that sense, but I will always go back into them. And the thing that's always remained with me was kind of first world, of using trench warfare as an analogy, that story of how the Germans and the Brits, played football one Christmas.
Yeah.
And also the fact that we also know there's a good book called Humankind by a Dutch writer. He also wrote Utopias for Realists or something like that, or Utopia for Realists, something like that. But I think it's in his book or some other book that I was reading about the idea that actually when they looked at the analysis of who shot whom in the wars, they found out that, for starters, hardly anyone ever used the bayonet. They were too scared to actually stab someone right up close. And very few, and however many bullets you gave people, and many of them remained unfired because it was very hard if you had someone in your sights to actually kill them. But if you were a drone pilot thousands of miles away and you were pressing a button and dropping a bomb, it was a lot easier to drop a bomb than to take someone's life face to face. The same thing in conversation. So kicking football around on the trenches during Christmas and on 1914, I go back into it looking to see, the humanity in the other side.
Is that what you'd say you've learned from having those, often unpleasant combative experiences? Is what you've learned to go back in and see the humanity?
Yeah, and also learn to laugh and then think, hold on, what? I just laughed with so-and-so who vehemently on TV or politics or newspaper articles disagrees with me, allegedly. And we don't, but we will also have things in common. And there are plenty of people I can have those conversations with, and we can actually laugh, have a hug, break the internet by being seen in a photograph together, and then think, oh my God, let's just detag ourselves. Both sides are attacking us for being in the same room as each other. And we will not get better by simply a polarized, I don't mean extremist in necessarily the view is extreme, but the polarized fundamentalist view of the other side must be 100% wrong, therefore, etc. There are things we can agree on, as I say, around each other's humanity, and being able to laugh sometimes at the wrong jokes, and then go, oops. We've forgotten how to do that because we become walking on eggshells, precious about everything. There are things that are funny and wrong. That's
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So I remember it was one of the Ricky Gervais thing. I was asked to kind of commentate on a TV show, and in the end, I wasn't used, but they said, "Can you watch it first?" Because I hadn't watched it, so I watched it, and it was in the news because there was a trans joke in it, and the trans people were offended by it. But the trans joke was like the third joke in after the dead baby joke.
Yeah. I know that one. Yeah.
And he'd made two other bad jokes about two other groups of people first, and people were only offended by the third joke. Thinking, you should have been offended at the first joke and all of them, or none of them, or recognized that it was humor, or recognized it was edgy, or recognized that he was proving to us that we're all or whatever else.
Yeah.
And I sat down with another friend and said, "Can we watch this? I want to see what your opinion is." And we sat down and watched it, and we said, "Oh my God, that was so funny. I now feel dirty for having laughed at it."
Yeah, which is, I think humour should be. You know, we're losing that a little bit, aren't we, with the bit of a totalitarian time?
Yeah, and it is. It's that polarization, fundamentalism, extremism, totalitarianism is present. We will see politics as a straight line left to right. It isn't a circle idea, or as those quadrants again. It's like it's control versus freedom. It's small government versus big government, whatever it might be. That it's full of spectra, as opposed to one single binary. And at the end of the day, the one thing that we all know happens in politics is that power corrupts in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get into a place of power and you start to love the power, and that explains a lot of people. You know, look at whether it is Trump, Musk, Starmer, whoever. You look at their background. People don't go into certain jobs as politicians or as lawyers just to make money, just for power. They go into it to make a better world. Often they start out with values, and then those values gradually get compromised by the reality of having to work, with the civil service, with the lack of money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Opposing views. I always actually do respect politicians.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I've enjoyed. Again, with the Human Library, we've had politicians as books in the Human Library from across the political spectrum. And it's one of the things that always got me was the fact that once you are elected, so to get elected, you have to promote your policies to as large a proportion of your community as you can get. And that often means slagging off the other side, which, as I said, is going to bounce back on you because you're wanting to stop attacking the others all the time. But secondly, once you actually get into power, they're now your constituency. So the people who didn't vote for you, they're now the people you have to actually work for. You don't work just for the Labour Party in your city. You now work for the Reform Party, the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, everyone in your community, because you now represent your area, and your area is comprised of political diversity. So, don't kind of mess things up in that sense. So actually, things will come back and bite you. So, as teenagers or as young people, whatever else, people get great jobs, get great roles on TV. Then someone goes deep diving on what you said on Twitter 10 years ago.
It's crazy.
You have free speech and fair speech and everything else, but maybe a little bit of responsible speech, like thinking in 10 years' time, do I really want to be caught having said this?
Absolutely. But, to that point, I think it was Kevin Hart, I think. He'd said something, and it wasn't the worst thing I'd seen, actually. And he'd apologised for it at the time. And then somebody had dug back. I think he was about to host the Golden Globes. It was a big deal, whatever he was going to do. And then he was demanded to apologise again. And I really respect him for it. He said, "I've already apologised back then. If I apologise to you again, the apology doesn't mean anything. And then apologies don't mean anything. I've apologised and I meant it. I won't apologise again." And I really respected that about him.
It's one of the reasons I've chosen never to delete my past beliefs or my past tweets, etc. And there's not enough space on the top of your Twitter profile to say that my opinions change. But I do say, on my website, and also say that, this 3-minute clip on news, I was responding to that particular question, and I might have responded in a different way a year ago, and it doesn't show. And people now call that flip-flopping. I call it learning.
Well, I do, Katie. I think if we still hold the same values we held even a year ago, even 5 years ago on everything, we are going really wrong. That's what I think we should be proud to change our opinions for good. Like I say, you don't want to just flip flop all the time, but to say, well, actually, I don't believe that anymore because I learned that, X, Y, Z, and open a dialogue. So brings me back to, why do you think people are afraid of saying that they've changed their mind?
I think people are afraid of saying that they changed their mind because it's seen as weakness. It's not
Mm,
seen as having a strong foundational opinion. I think it's probably one of the strongest and bravest things you can do. And
mm,
I would absolutely vote for someone who does change their mind, not in response to everything in that sense all the time,
yeah.
but I respect people the most who are willing to occasionally break rank, to
Mm,
disagree with their own, to disagree with their so-called, to agree with their so-called enemy on one point and just say,
yeah.
"Actually, I agree on that one." But we don't dare do that. So
Mm,
changing mind doesn't mean you've changed it now to something opposite.
mhm.
It's an adjustment,
Yeah,
an
for sure.
evolution of thought. It's like when we do have combative discussions and it's two ideas battling it out against each other, um, the reality is no one side is ever going to win completely over something because
Mm,
it is whether it's left, right, you know, leave, remain, sex, gender, whatever else. Society will keep evolving with further opinions and different people anyway. And if it's just a permanent ping pong, who has the ball right now, that never going to pan out in the long run. I like this idea that, we have the thesis and then the antithesis. Doesn't matter which
mm,
is right or wrong. But at the end of the day, we need to have some kind of synthesis, the
yeah.
combination of the two, the best bits of both, the consensus that enables us to live. It's like the sex gender debate, and it always comes down to, toilets or whatever else. At the end of the day, we're going to end up with more kind of toilets that are just toilets, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that will be look, this was a solution that could have been applied years ago if we stopped just fighting for our own, but actually recognize that everyone needs to pee or whatever it might be. So
Mm,
there are things where there are easier compromises, solutions where kind of nobody loses and everybody wins. There are some
yeah.
other ones which is a lot harder to do, like with sport, for example. Or
Mhm.
what on the gender debate, for example, and it does some things is some things you are going to lose,
Mhm.
and I think being trans means you are going to lose out on the sport thing. You
Yeah.
do have an inherent advantage. You're going to have to accept that if you want to transition, you lose your opportunity to take part in professional sport at that level, in the gender that you want to be, because I
Yeah.
still think you have that male sex advantage.
There
But
are there are always sacrifices to
I
our
think, yeah,
end
100%.
problem.
I think that, but there are great sacrifices also to just admit that you are wrong, or that you change your mind, or that you count someone as a friend, even though you disagree with them. There are
Yeah.
sacrifices to our public image, to
Mhm.
perceived kind of self-esteem, etc. But I think it takes true courage to admit that we've changed our minds, and true humility to say, and I will change my mind again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will no doubt receive more information, or the world will continue to change, or I
For
will mellow,
sure.
or maybe I won't mellow to the opposite, mellowing.
Might go the other way. Do you think there are any conversations we shouldn't be having in public now?
Oh, God, that's a very good question. I think if we think there are conversations we shouldn't have, that's the conversation we have to have.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
How we have it is then the next question. Is it, as you say, should it be a question we have in public? Should it be a question that we have to ask with moderation? Do we get more people to the table to have this conversation so it isn't just two-sided? I often think that a lot of society can be described as the opinions of a hand or something like this. There's always going to be, one extreme here and one extreme there. But then
Yeah.
there's this, the rest of society, the majority actually just like, can we not talk about that and that? Um, but we need to kind of not just have these panels or discussions between two opposing heads, but
Mm.
actually don't just get on the kind of the more polarized versions of those two views. Get on two other people who hold moderate versions but are still on those sides, and then get
Yeah.
an undecided floating voter on in the middle who hasn't decided which way they would go. And then you've got these two versions equally kind of almost trying to persuade the one in the middle. But then you're seeing this nuance of 5 opinions: the unmade up mind, or the open to both sides, the moderates on both sides who are willing to listen to the other side, but definitely belong to the same viewpoint group as the more extremists who both think the other side is completely, absolutely wrong and never to be engaged with. So I think bringing more people to the table is very important, particularly when you have the difficult conversations.
I think one of the issues with social media, something you just said then sort of reminded me about echo chambers, algorithms. It's not social media, it's the algorithms that have caused these mass echo chambers, and is why I wonder that people assume everybody agrees with them, because all they ever see on their feeds. I remember explaining to my father-in-law about what an algorithm was. And he hadn't seen something, and I explained to him, well, the more you like something, the more you will see that particular view. And it absolutely blew his mind.
It's the thing as only inviting the people that agree with you to dinner, and they're just going to sit there and reinforce your opinion.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's those things you occasionally go around, what would be your ideal dinner party, or rather your fantasy dinner party. Probably have Marilyn Monroe, Hitler, and Han or something there, because I would want to have a diversity of opinion there, and to find the human. For example, that's a very simple thing. Everybody needs to eat. Everybody, sure. These are things that we have to do. And everyone needs to work and keep a roof over their head. These are Maslow's hierarchy of needs stuff, and recognizing that as humans, we're all out there trying to function, trying to survive, and a little bit of recognition that we are all in this together in that respect, and that it's only kind of the luxury of our free time that enables us to sometimes get completely enraged by other stuff.
Yeah, sometimes I find I'm just far too busy to be annoyed about what's going on.
And you can't engage in everything all the time that way. But I think algorithms are the digital version of only, again, what we do personally and socially in the old days before we had technology to do it. Our echo chamber was our community. Was, again, who we chose to invite into our gang in school, or invite to dinner with, or stay friends with. So we were making our own algorithmic choices anyway. It's just that, and I think the more we are aware of them, you can break the algorithm as well. You can flood X cat pictures if you want, but the problem is most of the people who were more interested in, say, positivity, if you want to call it that, or be kind, or left. So they actually made the echo chamber more of what they hated about it by leaving it. So when there was a massive exodus from Twitter to, say, Blue Sky, or Mastodon, or all the other ones, I joined all the new ones, but I never left the old one. I actually still use the old one most. That's how I also continue to learn and potentially change my mind as to how the rest of society is thinking. And when we have a problem with where society is going, the biggest kind of reason for that is because we abandoned the rest of society. We left people behind. You have to go forward together, and it may be slower. And I think that's what frustrates some of the younger people who want their idealistic utopian societies, is because they want to get there via kind of young people revolution tomorrow. Pick a topic, it'll be changed in 10 years' time. But the point is, if you go slowly as a society rather than fast, you can take more people with you, and then you do have a far more harmonious kind of community living in that sense.
And finally, Katy, if there's somebody who's listened to this and they want to start speaking up a little bit more, having more interesting conversations, but they've been afraid to, what advice would you give them to just get started?
I would say, as I say, try not to take things personally. I know it's human to do so, but just breathe and recognize people say and where they're coming from. There's a journey to got to what just came out of their mouth. Be more interested in people's journeys rather than their kind of destinations or the current station they're at. Discover the human interest story in everyone. Be a journalist in that sense. Be, the Sunday magazine that goes deeper into the human life. Find someone's context, background. So always be interested in the human being, and don't just dive into the ping pong or arguments or whatever they might be. Human beings are deeply, deeply interesting. Even
Yeah.
if they aren't at first because they're shy or you don't think you have anything in common. But everybody's had some kind of, weird hobby, some kind of interesting place they've been to, some kind of interesting happening in the world. That whole 6 degrees of connection, you'll find something in common, someone in common with somebody. So, look for those engagements. And I say, self-deprecating, I know I talk a lot, I have much of a filter, I'm ADHD, but despite talking a lot, I also do love asking a lot.
Yeah.
I may not appear to always listen because of my kind of heavy distracted mind, but at the same time, I am fascinated by other people, and what they think and what they believe and how they got there. But I also
keep asking questions.
but also having changed more than once myself in multiple ways, politically and everything else, I also hold out the belief that nobody's other beliefs are necessarily permanently fixed. What does an interesting world look like? What would it take for the two of us to go out for dinner, to have a conversation? What would we have to find in common to be able to share, to share a pint or to share a dinner?
Yeah.
Let's look for that common ground, and then we can discuss the less common ground on more friendlier terms.
Yeah, that's a really nice one. On that note, if people do want to look into you, Katy, where should they go to find your most current stuff?
Well, having that kind of weird multi-gendered name of Katy Jon Went, there's pretty much any one of me when you type me into and I realized in the early days, if you just typed in Katy Went, it's just like Katy followed by a verb went, and then it all came up with surnames. So it's quite useful to keep the John in the middle there. But yeah, you just type my name in, you'll find my website and my social media. I guess loads of the interviews I've done are on my website, katyjon.com, which shows various media clips from over the years. But ultimately, connect with me. I accept kind of friend requests, conversations, direct messages on all platforms. And I'm always up for going out for a drink or dinner with a stranger to find out how humans tick, really.
How lovely. Oh, thank you so much for your time today, Katy.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Penny.
I'll just switch the recording off. That's great. Return that.